Hello and welcome. My name is Shauna Brown, and I will be the host for this TLC session. We're excited that you've joined us today. Please welcome our presenters, Jamie and Michelle.
Hi everyone, my name is Jamie Lynn, and I create the multimedia tutorials for the Ashford University Library. I'm also an educator in the library world, as speaking and writing about the importance of understanding and designing for your user, of which creating engaging and accessible content is part of that. So we have half an hour today to discuss what really can be several days worth of workshops. So I hope that this will get you interested and wanting to know more. We've included some links at the end of this presentation to some of our favorite resources online. So should you wish to explore this topic further, there will be some of our suggested resources there. I'm going to start us off by talking about why accessibility matters. And then Michelle will cover best practices and provide ways to make your course content accessible, which includes steps that you can take when creating course announcements, commenting on discussion posts, emailing students, and providing waypoint feedback. So why do we care about accessibility at Ashford University? There are three main reasons that jump out to me about why accessibility matters. And the first is that we want to provide equal educational opportunities for all of our students. We want all our learners to be successful and to be able to take the classes that interest them and which will help them not only in their careers, but also in providing the skills that are needed for navigating through life. Second, accessibility has become a really hot topic in the legal sphere in the last few years, so I will briefly talk about this. And then finally, technology changes rapidly in our society and is also rapidly changing our society. So when we consider mobile and voice interactive technologies, accessibility makes a lot of practical sense. So in summary, accessibility is about equal access to information, to education, to opportunity, and to inclusion in our increasingly digital society. Now, one of the common misperceptions about accessibility that those of us who work in this area hear from faculty is that it doesn't pertain to them, their course, or their specific field. For instance, no one in my class is blind or deaf, or a blind or deaf person is not able to work a career in this field, so my course does not need to be accessible. My response to this perspective is that, first of all, accessibility is not just for students who have visual or hearing impairments. The vast majority of students who request accommodations through our Access and Wellness Department do so for a variety of learning disabilities. And also, video captions especially are extremely helpful for foreign language learners, and as well as those who have certain situational needs. And by that, I mean, so if you find yourself in a really quiet environment or perhaps a really loud environment in which you just cannot listen to audio. My example is if you've got a baby sleeping next to you, but you're still trying to do your homework and you don't have your headphones, you'd like to watch the video using captions. And finally, especially as it relates to those with disabilities, accessibility is a matter of civil rights, which leads me into the legal reasons about why we care about accessibility. So the legal landscape surrounding accessibility is pretty complicated, and I don't want to get into too much detail about it. The most important thing for you to consider is this graph. And now this picture is not just a random picture of an upward-facing arrow. This arrow was made using actual figures of legal accessibility lawsuits over the last 5 years. So as you can see, the number is rapidly increasing, and there are a lot of reasons for this. Accessibility falls under ADA Titles 2 and 3, Public Entities and Public Accommodation. And these definitions are now expanding to include the online environment, which includes video content, online images, and online navigation. Also, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which we call WCAG, these have been incorporated into federal laws. So institutions that are federally owned or operated, or those that do business with these institutions, are affected by these rules. Now, Ashford University is not directly subject to Section 508, but many other educational institutions are. So if you teach for another university, for instance, getting into the habit of creating accessible content from the beginning means that you don't have to go back and retroactively make something accessible in order to comply with Section 508 for another institution that you work for or do business with. So my favorite argument for accessibility is technological change. Our entire society is changing. We use our mobile devices so much more now than we did just a few years ago. This chart on the left here shows that the third most popular screen reader today is Apple VoiceOver, which is the narrator built into Apple devices. JAWS is a standard desktop screen reader, which has been around forever, and Nvidia is a popular open source screen reader that you can download from the web. Michelle and I like to use Nvidia when we are testing our content to make sure that it's accessible. So the popularity of VoiceOver really indicates something that we already know. Mobile content is increasingly important, and people are changing the way that they interact with their mobile devices. Gartner, which is a very well-respected market research firm, predicts that within 2 years, 30% of all internet searches will be voice interactions. So this is not just people using screen readers, all online searches, 30% of all searches within 2 years. So this means we're talking to our machines, and our machines are talking back at us. So make sure that your documents are understandable and readable to these machines. And I'm going to turn it over from here to Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm an instructional designer, and I'm also an adjunct faculty member, and I'm here to discuss the best practices for making your online Canvas course accessible. All right, so this is important for all of the reasons Jamie has just mentioned, but it's also important because these best practices, if done successfully, are not only going to make your courses more user-friendly to students with accessibility needs, but it's actually going to benefit all of your students because we are incorporating learner theory, and it just boils down to making sure that your course content is as student-friendly as possible. So why does it matter? Because it affects everyone. One of the best ways that you can make your course content more accessible is to write with your students in mind. To do this, you need to use good UX writing principles, and UX stands for user experience. And we're going to suggest that you use short, scannable, simple, clear, and human language when you write your course content. So you're probably thinking, Michelle, what do you mean by human? I mean that your course content meets students where they are. And I say this because if you're writing overly pedantic or overly complicated announcements, your brilliance could be lost on students with learning disabilities. Another good best practice for creating your announcements or your guidance is to always introduce videos and other learning objects that you include in your announcement. We do this because a sighted person can see when a YouTube video has been embedded, but a person using a screen reader has no indication that the video has been embedded unless you tell them, like, in the following video, you will blah, blah, blah. So introducing a video provides context for people using screen readers. Additionally, Jamie and I would like to recommend that you use level headings when creating announcements. This is H1, H2, H3, header 1, header 2, header 3. This provides sections within your announcement, and screen readers and people using a keyboard can tab through to the different level headings to get to the content they need. So not only does this break up content visually for sighted users, this allows people using a keyboard to jump to the content that they need. Additionally, we'd like to advise that you use sensitive language, and this is a nice to have. A lot of times when we include learning objects like an infographic or a video, we often say, see this video on, or view this tutorial, or look at this infographic. And this isn't sensitive language for a person who might be blind. So we recommend that instead of using see, view, or look at, that you try using language like go to, open, or visit. This is just more inclusive language for our students. All right, so I'd like to make the argument on why headers are so important. As you can see here on the left, we have just a wall of text. Like, this is in my first announcement that I post in my course, and a lot of you aren't even reading this. You're like, yeah, that's a bunch of text. However, the minute you add level headings, this now becomes chunkable. This is now scannable, and this is now navigable with a keyboard. So headers really do make a difference. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is making your course content accessible is a big component of that, is properly alt texting your images. And before I move on to what that means, I should probably explain what it means to alt text. And alt text is the text that is read by a screen reader to describe images to users who are unable to see them. To properly alt text, you need to determine if your image is decorative or if it's meaningful. And I use these terms lightly, but decorative images decorative images present information that is not necessary, or it doesn't convey any real information. It's merely used for layout or for enhancement. And I typically use decorative images to help break up my content. Meaningful images, on the other hand, present information or have a significance in explaining a concept, or they convey a tone. So if your images are decorative, you can mark them as such, but if they're meaningful, you will have to add alt text. Okay, so the other thing we recommend in terms of alt texting is making sure that your alt text is succinct, so try to make it as clear and as short as possible, that it's accurate in that if the images contain text, you need to include that text in your alt text, and that it's equal. And equal is a really big component of alt texting. You basically want to make sure that if read by a screen reader, the person hearing it has the same experience as someone who would be seeing it. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. And if the image is pertinent to understand, you need to describe the image. So as you can see on the corner, there's a bit emoji of myself. I'm much cuter as a bit emoji. But I like to include bit emojis in my discussion board posts with my students. It's a way of encouraging them and presenting a sense of self in my classroom. So I usually say something like, great job, this is an excellent post, I really like blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, I include this little image of myself high-fiving them. And because this conveys a tone and a feeling, it needs to be alt texted. So it would say something like Professor Lekkerkerk giving you a high five. That way, if a student's listening to it with a screen reader, they still understand the feeling and the tone of that image. The other thing we recommend is that you do not use phrases like image of or graphic of. Like this would just be Professor Lekkerkerk giving you a high five. It is not an image of Professor Lekkerkerk giving you a high five. That's not necessary for those using a screen reader. And as Jamie likes to call it, what is it, visual?
Yeah, I have a blind friend who calls all images visual garbage. She's like, I don't need to know any of the visual garbage, so let's just make it invisible to a screen reader.
Yes, so those are general best practices for alt texting. And the other thing is you never want to include any new information in the alt text because only people using a screen reader will get that. So I want to give you an example. So here I have a chunk of my instructor guidance. And then I have this image here at the bottom. It's the blue image icon thing. So my question for you all, what do you think? Is this decorative or is it meaningful? Do I need to alt text this image? I'll let you guys chat that up. Anybody have any considerations if this is meaningful or decorative?
Decorative.
Yes.
No alt text.
No alt text. This is totally a decorative image. It conveys no information and it's simply used to break up my content for visual learners. So for this one, when I embed the image in Canvas, I simply just need to check off that box that means decorative. A lot of you already know this, but I'm just reminding you that that option is there for you. Okay, one other one. Here I've included an image to help elaborate the crack test. So I ask you guys, this one, is it decorative or is this meaningful?
Amy jumped right in.
Yep, it's totally meaningful. Why? It contains text. So not only does it visually lay out the acronym of CRAP, it also gives more information here that I need to include in the alt text. So my alt text for this specific image can't just say crack test image. That is incorrect. I would have to say crack test, C equals currency, colon, the timeliness of information. And I'd literally have to write out all of the text that's included in this image. So good job, guys. So I just want to remind you what is helpful and what is not helpful alt text. Specifically, I like to include infographics in my instructor guidance in my announcements because I think visuals speak very loudly. Be careful when you alt text that you don't just give the title of the image. So an example of a poorly worded alt text would be scholarly versus popular sources infographic. Although that's what this is, and that is what this is titled, it doesn't actually help someone who is using a screen reader because they're missing out all of the little sections within this infographic. So to properly alt text this image, you literally have to write out all of the words that are contained in this image. And I know what you're thinking, oh, that's so much work. Yes, but if you're like me, you probably reuse your course announcements from course to course. So if you do this properly the first time, you've saved yourself effort and energy for all of your classes after that. So do it right the first time and you're set for every other course that you do. Any questions about alt texting, please add them to the chat and Jamie and I will address them as we go. But the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is hyperlinks. And I want to talk to you about hyperlinks because screen readers interact with hyperlinks differently. In that, screen readers often tell students that it is a link. It reads link and then it reads whatever is hyperlinked. This is important because if you're giving the full URL of a link, like http:// it will literally read all of the colons and slashes and dashes and letters. And as you know, hyperlinks can be pretty unruly and they get really long. So we avoid giving the whole hyperlink. The other thing you need to know about screen readers is that people using a keyboard or screen reader can navigate by skipping from link to link. It's a way of negotiating the content. And they can often get to a link through skipping all of the other text within that announcement. So if I have a link at the beginning and the link at the end, it can jump from that link to the one at the end. So because of this, you need to do the following. You need to avoid giving the full URL for the reasons I just explained. Instead, use a descriptive phrase or title instead. And you need to avoid language that's vague because a student can jump just to that link and it's just going to read link, click here. And that means nothing to someone who's just hearing it. So avoid language like click here or learn more or giving the full URL. And I want to give you a suggestion that Control-K often hyperlinks things. And there's also a hyperlink button within Canvas that will help you hyperlink text. All right, let me give you some examples to help us work through what this actually means and how it looks. So in our first example, I might write something like, need help? To chat with a writing tutor, visit, and then you might be tempted just to copy that link in because this is the easy way to do it. However, this is problematic because it's just going to read http://bit.ly, blah, 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 and it's going to take them so many minutes to get through that. What could we do instead to fix this hyperlink? Anybody have any suggestions? What would be a solution?
Embed the hyperlink as text.
Yes, that is a great thing. So what you can do instead is just reframe your question and say need help and then give a descriptive phrase or title and then hyperlink those words. This way, when the person using a screen reader listens to this, it will say need help, link, chat with a 24/7 writing tutor. It is much shorter and is much more understandable.
It also looks visually better for those of us looking at the screen, so it just looks better as well.
And you know, the hyperlink I've given here, the bit.ly one, is actually not that bad because you can see within that hyperlink that it's chat with a writing expert. But a lot of URLs aren't that pretty, and they're just a random assortment of letters and punctuation that is literally read out loud. So this is a much better approach. All right, so I have another example for you all. I often see people saying, click here for help, click here for a tutorial, click here for this. How can we fix this specific one? What could we do instead? Any suggestions? This one's a little tricky because this one you have to figure out what you're clicking to instead of here, because you guys probably don't even know because it's so vague. What I would recommend is I would say something like insert the title of the thing to make a thesis statement. And that way this will read to a person as link thesis generator rather than link here. So this is much better user experience for our learners. And the last point I want to make about hyperlinks is that remember that you'd like to make your hyperlinks as descriptive as possible. For example, here I've said something like, before you begin, be sure to read Google's tips and tricks. This is pretty descriptive. However, if a student is jumping from link to link, they're going to get to this one and it's just going to read to them, link, tips and tricks. Yes, that's better than click here, but it's still not descriptive enough. So I just recommend that just hyperlink a little bit more of that text or change the description a little bit so it's as clear as possible. Any questions about hyperlinks, please add them to the chat. The next thing I want to talk to you specifically about are some ways that you can make the various components of your class as accessible as possible. The first thing I want to discuss is your course announcements and how to make them accessible. Here is my bullet point list for your reference. We've covered a lot of these before, like use student-friendly language, introduce videos, do your hyperlinks properly. But I just want to point out a couple of things here. When you're making your announcements, do not use tables to organize your content. A lot of people like to make information into tables that looks more organized. However, tables are notoriously bad for accessibility, so avoid using them if possible in your announcements. Additionally, I'd like to recommend that you do not use color to convey meaning. I know I use color to help make text or due dates pop in my assignments. However, a screen reader doesn't read color. So instead, use color and bold or color and italics because a screen reader does register italics and bold. So pair those up or just use bold or italics because screen reader isn't going to register color. And lastly, our announcements in our Canvas classroom have an accessibility checker. It looks just like this little man in a circle, yay, and you can click on it and it will check your announcement for any issues that could come up. For example, I forgot to alt text this image and I ran the accessibility checker and it goes, hey Michelle, you failed at life, please add the alt text. And it's a great way to check everything before you hit that publish button. So make sure that you always run the accessibility check for your announcements. Additionally, this is also available in discussion board posts, so you can do this for any comments that you make to students as well. All right, so we're going to just talk about a couple discussion board best practices. The major one here, because a lot of these are the same, I'm just putting them here to remind you of the various components. The biggest one I would like to emphasize to you is to always use the student's name at the beginning of the comment, even if you are replying directly to that student. That way, if a person using a keyboard or a screen reader knows you are talking to them. As you guys know, the discussion board thread can be a little unwieldy, especially if there's multiple comments on a post. So using the name at the beginning of the comment lets the person with the screen reader know for sure you are talking to them, and it avoids confusion on their behalf. Okay? All right. In terms of emailing your students, here are the best practices that we recommend. A lot of these are the same. I'm just going to point out the things that are different. First of all, I'd like to recommend that you use your Office 365 Outlook or your INF email instead of the Canvas inbox. And I recommend this because your Canvas inbox has no bells and whistles to it. So if you wanted to include a link, you'd have to copy the whole link out. And as we talked about, that is poor learner experience. So we recommend using your Outlook or your INF faculty email. Next, I'd like to recommend that if you are including attachments like a guide, a PDF, or a resource, that you title it in a meaningful way. It just doesn't say document 1 or week 1. Tell them what it is, week 1 assignment feedback. So be sure to do all of this. And also in the email, let them know that an attachment is included. All right, I just want to remind you that this is what it looks like when you use the inbox feature in Canvas if you're including a link. As you can see, that is a very long, ugly URL that would be read to students. So instead, please use Outlook or the INF email tool. All right, last thing we want to talk about in terms of accessibility best practices is waypoint comments, because this is where you do a lot of your feedback to students. A lot of things we want to recommend here is the same as before. I just want to point out that do not put your hyperlinks in the in-text comments on the document. A lot of people, you highlight the title and then you said, or highlight a citation and you might say, please fix your in-text citations for help with this, and then you give a link. Because you can't hyperlink properly within the in-text comments, it just will be that full link that is really hard for a screen reader to read. So instead, we recommend that you save your hyperlinks and your information for the summarized feedback section of your rubric. So here's where you should include your links and any other helpful information. So save all those hyperlinks for this section. Okay, we ran through a bunch of best practices here. There's a lot of information. If you'd like to download a PDF of these best practices, I have a bit.ly at the bottom. It's bit.ly/2pvfevc. So descriptive. It's just hard because I need to tell you it. You can download it. Here, you can find a handout that goes over all of the best practices we have just talked about. Do we have any questions for our last 3 minutes of our TLC presentation? Yes, let me go to the resources section. Here are some resources that Jamie and I recommend, specifically NVIDIA for a free screen reader, so you can test out things that you make, the WAC 2.0 guidelines, and specifically a color checker is included here. So if you're ever designing like a PowerPoint or anything like that, it's good to have some color contrast. Do you have any questions, Jamie?
No.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I hope we shed some light on why accessibility is so important and how to make it manageable for your classroom. Thank you all so much.